Authentic is sponsored in whole by Voice of Prophecy.
Today we're going to take a bit of a look at one of America's greatest thinkers. And because the guy was so prolific, I'm going to pick and choose from thousands of pages because I think he was getting really close to solving one of the biggest questions human beings have ever asked.
Welcome to Authentic. Sean Boonstra explores real existential questions about the meaning of your life and how you can live a genuine human existence. Listen every week right here on this station or on your favorite podcatcher. Here's Sean with this week's episode of Authentic.
The biggest problem in the universe is the question of who we are. Now, admittedly, there seem to be more urgent problems like solving world hunger or achieving world peace. And if you happen to be starving or living in a war zone, well, obviously those kinds of problems would become your priority. But let's take a page from Abraham Maslow for just a moment and assume that your basic physiological needs are already being met. You're properly nourished and your physical safety is guaranteed. What becomes your next priority? Well, according to Maslow, you need to be loved and feel like you belong, and then you need a degree of self-esteem, and then you need something called self-actualization. You need to find meaning and purpose for your existence. But you're not going to find that unless you answer the one big question that everybody has to deal with sooner or later, and that's, who am I? I mean, here you are, a self-aware, contemplative person, an individual who has a sense of personal identity that somehow stays constant all the way through your entire life. But how does that happen? Back in the 19th century, the practice of science and philosophy suddenly threw up a little bit of a roadblock. Up to that time, we managed to convince ourselves that human beings can understand the essential nature of the universe simply by using our capacity for reason. We used to think that our reasoning had to be informed by some kind of reliable external checkpoint, and once upon a time, that was God. But then sometime after Thomas Aquinas, who tried to use raw logic to prove God's existence, we started to think that our reason was perfectly good without God's help. We could just apply it completely unaided. So what we did was start to think of the universe as a machine. And it was a model that worked pretty well because there does appear to be a logic and order behind the cosmos. Mathematical equations can make reliable predictions, like when the orbit of a planet will be complete or when the next eclipse is going to take place. We started to think of the universe as a clock. And in our scientific thinking, we kind of left out some very human phenomena, things like love or passion or personality, because the universe was now just a matter of mechanical cause and effect. And of course, cause and effect is a very useful concept. If you want to understand why something happened, go back and study what came before that, and then look at what came before that, and so on. If you go back far enough, the thinking goes, you can pretty much explain anything as long as you can get to the very beginning. But where that suddenly fell apart was when it came to the existence of human beings. Trying to explain who or what we are in terms of mere physical cause and effect led us to some pretty empty conclusions. If you and I really are just the product of time and chance, then our lives don't mean anything. And if there's one thing all of us crave as human beings, it's meaning. Then we got Charles Darwin, bolstered by people like Thomas Huxley, who popularized this notion of survival of the fittest. The wonder of life was now explained as just another science. They said organisms mutate, they change, and if they happen to develop a new trait that makes survival easier, then that trait begins to dominate. Not to make it seem too simplistic, but if your fins mutate and they become wings, you can fly. And now your flightless cousins are more likely to get eaten by the predator, which means it's far more likely that you're going to live and produce a bunch of offspring who have the same advantage as you. They've got wings. Now, in reality, it's more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. The rise of Darwin meant that life could be understood without the need for a creator. But it also created a big problem because the ideas that bolstered Darwinism actually seemed to run contrary to the way that human beings function. For centuries, we convinced ourselves that human beings have agency. We have the ability to make meaningful choices. And by making choices, you can alter the course of your life. But if everything is really just a case of cause and effect, and you and I are the product of a mindless mechanistic universe, then everything we do is just the mindless product of something that happened in the past. You think you actually decided to go to the beach today? No, you didn't. Everything that happened in the distant past brought the whole world to this moment and predetermined your actions, and it just conspired to make you think you actually made a decision. This is a philosophy that some people call determinism or even fatalism, and it's basically the idea that nobody has a choice about absolutely anything. All of us are just being carried along by the mindless universe and the physical principles that drive it. Your emotions, those are nothing but chemical reactions. Your sense of pleasure or pain, more chemicals. Your sense of identity, well, that's an illusion because in a fatalistic universe, there's no such thing as free will. And I know, it seems like only philosophical eggheads living in ivory towers would think this way. But you can actually see this kind of belief system starting to play out in the world of 21st century morality. Let's consider what happens when somebody does something really, really awful. Most of us are convinced there must be some kind of underlying reason for that behavior. And of course, sometimes there is. Sometimes antisocial criminals develop their evil personalities because of the way they were raised. But if you follow that train of thought all the way to its logical conclusion, you suddenly end up in a place where nobody is actually responsible for just about anything. Everybody's just performing a mindless role in the universe like every other meaningless object. The whole concept of morality and moral choice, that becomes meaningless. This was a thought that drove a lot of later existential philosophers completely nuts, people like Nietzsche or Camus. If you look at their writings, you'll find an awful lot of despair, tortured questions asking, what's the purpose of living if I don't have any choice? If I'm just being involuntarily carried along by this mindless stream of cause and effect, then what's the point of even trying to exist in a meaningful way? There's nothing you could do to make your life any better then, is there? There's nothing you can do to improve your character or change who you are. There's absolutely no point to being either pessimistic or optimistic because nothing you do is going to change anything. The script has already been written by the universe with no edits allowed. This is the reason that some of these famous thinkers actually toyed with the concept of suicide. What's the point of living if you can't actually make choices and live? It's a philosophy that most people find, depressing, and with good reason. It feels like it runs completely contrary to essential human nature. If these determinists, these fatalists are correct, then why do we seem to be wired to believe in something better? Why do we have passions and hopes and desires and goals and relationships? What would be the point to those things? It's a materialistic view of the universe, and it's one that atheists kind of like. But what they've discovered is that what they're trying to sell to us isn't selling well. They insist that there's no God. They're with Nietzsche, who said God is dead, and there's only this cold, uncaring universe out there for us to live in. That's a pretty tough sell because there's something in our makeup that fights against that idea. Which brings me to the famous American philosopher, William James, who really struggled with what these fatalists were saying. He realized that a purely material universe does not line up with human experience. And of course, it probably didn't help that in his early childhood, his father was a strict Calvinist, which is kind of a Christian determinism, at least when it comes to salvation. I was raised among Calvinists, and one of their key ideas is that God has already determined your fate before you're born. Some of us are going to heaven, some of us are going to hell. There's nothing you can do about it. Of course, you don't really know which group you're in, which can lead to a little bit of anxiety if you're prone to overthinking. So, eventually, William James's father rejected the ideas that human beings don't have free will, and he dropped his commitment to Calvinism in favor of a rather obscure esoteric Christian sect. He actually turned to the teachings of the mystic Swedenborg, which made him feel a lot better about his ability to make meaningful decisions. But right now, I've got to make a meaningful decision about the way I'm going to use my time. So I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back after this.
Life can throw a lot at us. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. But that's where the Bible comes in. It's our guide to a more fulfilling life. Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we've created the Discover Bible Guides to be your guide to the Bible. They're designed to be simple, easy to use, and provide answers to many of life's toughest questions. And they're absolutely free. Sign up at BibleStudies.com today and start your journey of discovery.
This is Authentic with Sean Boonstra and the Voice of Prophecy.
The American philosopher William James became really discouraged with the idea that you and I don't have the ability to make actual choices. The idea that the universe is just a machine and we're just part of that. He originally trained to be a medical doctor, which eventually led him into the field of psychology at Harvard. From there, he became obsessed with the study of metaphysics, that branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of existence. It's basically the study of why is there something out there instead of nothing. So James decided that maybe the existentialist philosophers in Europe were wrong. Instead of getting lost in the dismal swamp of trying to prove your own existence or the problematic question of how you can know for sure that your mind can be trusted, maybe, he said, we should take a far more pragmatic approach. Maybe we should look at the consequences of our ideas when we act on them to see if they match reality. It's a little like the scientific method. He said, you should go and try your ideas in the real world to see if they still make sense. That makes sense to me. You see, at this point, most philosophers had been operating under the assumption that we're just machines and that the human psyche could be understood through scientific experiment. David Hume had suggested there's actually no such thing as cause and effect, and what looks like human consciousness is really just the product of your senses picking up data like a slideshow being projected on the back of your brain. But William James started talking about something I promise you've heard before: stream of consciousness. It's a phrase we still use when we're writing or talking about whatever pops into our head at the moment. But for Mr. James, thoughts were very personal. Take everything else away from me, I still have my thoughts, and they define who I am. You can never get inside my head and share all my thoughts, and I can't do that with you either. Here's how he put it. Each mind keeps its own thoughts to itself. There is no giving or bartering between them. No thought ever comes into direct sight of a thought in another personal consciousness than its own. Absolute insulation, irreducible pluralism is the law. Essentially, he's saying that you are your thoughts, and the moment you stop having thoughts, that probably means you're dead. And in that regard, he kind of agrees with something the Bible says. Put not your trust in princes, the Bible says, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that day, his very plans perish. In other words, the moment you stop thinking is the moment your conscious existence actually comes to an end. And that conscious existence, that conscious mind, Mr. James said, is allowed to make choices. The world around you is very real, and you can ignore all the nonsense coming from those French existentialists. You have the ability to make real choices about how you interact with the world. The way he put it, he said, you have the will to believe. And I know that sounds like common sense, and it's hard to believe that somebody made a name for himself by teaching people you get to choose. Because for most of us, doesn't that seem kind of obvious? For William James, though, who was one of the founding fathers of modern psychology, that idea was kind of liberating. The course of his life, he discovered, was not predetermined. I mean, of course, there's always something we can't control, and there are circumstances that happen against our will, but even then, inside the confines of what you can't control, you can still control yourself. And this is where it gets interesting. William James was convinced there's got to be something more to our existence than just a cold, empty universe. He looked at the work of some European psychologists and he said that they were, I quote, bent on studying the elements of mental life, dissecting them out from the gross results from which they are embedded, as far as possible, reducing them to quantitative scales. What's he saying? Well, they were trying to be strictly scientific about human nature. And that, said James, is ridiculous. You can't reduce what it means to be human so that it fits in a spreadsheet full of facts and figures. I mean, yes, the brain has chemistry, and yes, we are kind of prisoners of our biology. But to say that human existence is just a machine, it runs completely contrary to the way we actually experience this world. It ignores our subjective sense of being conscious. Again, here's how James described it. The continuous flow of the mental stream is sacrificed, and in its place, an atomism, a brick-bat plan of construction is preached, for the existence of which no good introspective grounds can be brought forward, and out of which presently grow all sorts of paradoxes and contradictions, the heritage of woe of students of the mind. Okay, to put that simply, a purely material universe doesn't match reality. It doesn't account for our existence. I mean, we really still don't know what consciousness is. I've seen attempts by atheists to explain it in purely rational physical terms, but I promise you, not one of these so-called explanations actually matches human experience. Some things cannot be explained in a lab. To this day, consciousness remains one of the biggest problems that skeptics face. They have to explain this split between the mind and the body. In fact, some people actually call that the mind-body problem. How in the world did self-aware, contemplative beings like you and me just emerge from a purely mechanical universe? It doesn't seem possible. Back in James's day, people were convinced there's got to be a mechanistic explanation for just about everything. But if you think about it, if you're going to lean on reason to figure out the universe, that actually puts our brains at the very apex of the universe. And that left William James unconvinced. In fact, in 1910 he wrote, "I firmly disbelieve myself that our human experience is the highest form of experience extant in the universe. I believe rather that we stand in much the same relation to the whole of the universe as our canine and feline pets do to the whole of human life. They inhabit our drawing rooms and libraries. They take part in scenes of whose significance they have no inkling. They are merely tangent to the curves of history, the beginnings and ends and forms of which pass wholly beyond their ken. So we are tangents to the wider life of things." He's saying we just aren't capable of knowing everything, which of course brings us to the subject of God. And I think one of the reasons I'm attracted to the philosophy of William James, at least in part, is because he kind of threw the brakes on the raw atheism that was taking over Europe at the time. Hang on, he said, there has got to be a God. There's got to be something that explains why we're wired the way we are. So of course, I resonate with that. But the nature of God is where I part company with William James, even though I think he was onto something. Let me see if I can explain. Philosophers in James's time were addicted to something called monism. They were looking for an idea that would harmonize everything in the observable universe. Since the very beginning of classical philosophy, people have been trying to boil the universe down to just one easy-to-understand concept. What explains everything? Well, James didn't like that, and I'll be right back after this to tell you why.
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages. Your whole family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon. Check it out today at discoverymountain.com.
This is Authentic with Sean Boonstra and the Voice of Prophecy.
William James mentioned that philosophers are addicted to the idea of absolutes, the idea that there must be an absolute whole, a singularity that explains absolutely everything in the universe. But then he asked this question: why are we so addicted to the number one? Why do we think everything has to harmonize? And this is really where Mr. James leaves behind a biblical understanding of God. He taught that if God is absolute, if He's all-powerful and all-knowing, that would mean that none of us has the power of choice. So instead, William James said that God must be rather limited, because while He can clearly see evidence for God's existence in this universe, He can't possibly be in charge of everything, right? Otherwise, why would we have pain and chaos? Instead of a universe, why can't there be a multiverse, where part of the universe is run by God, but another part is dominated by chaos? James said that maybe the universe is not just one thing. And to be honest, Mr. James was skating really, really close to the edge of biblical theology. He got it wrong, but he was close. He missed the truth by a millimeter. One of the biggest issues the writers of the Bible deal with is the problem of evil. How can God be loving and all-powerful, but we still have a world that looks like this? It's the number one objection raised by skeptics who love to poke fun at believers. If God is real, then why did so-and-so get cancer? If God is real, then why is there war in the Middle East? William James was attempting to deal with a very real question when he said God must be limited. It was his way of answering the problem of evil. And of course, according to the Bible, God is not limited. But there does appear to be more than one force at work in this universe. Look at what you find in Revelation chapter 12, where it says, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven." Oh, wait a minute. I thought heaven was a place completely free of pain and suffering. Well, actually, not yet, according to the Bible. The Bible says there was war in the kingdom of God. So how can that be? Well, it's for the same reason that William James was obsessed with, and that's the concept of free will. The God of the Bible does not predetermine your life because he values liberty. He values the ability to choose. And why would God allow that? It's because his nature is defined as love. Remember what the Apostle John said in 1 John 4, verse 8. "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." You see, if you aren't free to choose against God, then loving God is kind of meaningless. You're nothing but a puppet in a deterministic universe. But because God prizes meaningful relationships, he also prizes freedom of conscience. What we did was exercise the wrong option. We became evil, which means that God was now faced with a choice of his own. He could either destroy us instantly, or he could allow our choices to run their full course and offer to redeem us. It's a brilliant solution, really. I mean, once you've lived in this painful world and you get redeemed from it, are you ever going to choose this place again? No. William James was convinced that you and I have freedom of choice, freedom of the will, and the Bible agrees with him on that. This is the reason that chaos sometimes appears to reign over our existence. It's not because God is limited, it's because he's love, and he's letting us experience exactly what we asked for. And of course, the next question we've got to ask is how in the world a God of love could let us live in this condition forever? And this is the part that William James missed. God doesn't do that. Just listen to the words of Jesus, and I want you to notice how realistic the Bible is about the painful nature of living in this world. "Truly, truly, I say to you," Jesus said, "you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice." So, he's addressing this idea that the world we live in seems to reward evil. Good people suffer, bad people get away with everything. Now, here comes the rest of the story from Jesus himself. "You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn to joy. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. So also, you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." All right, time for another quick break, but I'll be right back after this.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Voice of Prophecy's free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the prophetic mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and the world around you. You can study online or request them by mail. Visit BibleStudies.com and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
Welcome back. It's Authentic with Sean Boonstra and the Voice of Prophecy.
On more than one occasion, the Bible compares the difficulty of living in this world to labor pain. In Matthew chapter 24, the Greek word used to describe things like war, famine, and pestilence is odin. Most English Bibles render that word as sorrow, which is a pretty good translation, but odin literally means contractions or birth pangs. It's reminding us that our current existence is painful. And right before the break, we looked at that promise from Jesus in John chapter 16, which told us that yes, we have a lot of reasons to be distressed, a lot of reasons to shed tears and feel anxiety, but eventually that's going to end. And the joy that God promises to give us will make that pain just a distant memory. It's like that moment at the end of a painful delivery when the baby gets placed in mom's arms and suddenly it's, "What pain? What are you talking about? Look at this beautiful child." Look, There's a reason we find it deeply unsatisfying when atheists tell us there's nothing more to our existence than a cold, empty, mechanical universe. The reason it bothers us is because it's not true. If it was true, it would leave us with no choices, no meaning, no hope. And there's something in the heart of every human being that really pushes back against that kind of existence. It's why William James tried so hard to push back on the nihilism and fatalism that were pouring out of the classrooms of Europe and starting to show up here in America. One famous historian pictured James like a doctor, quarantining the dangerous ideas from Europe so they wouldn't infect the United States. And of course, for the moment, it looks like he failed, because the levels of anxiety here in the West are rising steadily. People are dealing with things like depression and suicidal thoughts in record numbers. And we are now suffering the consequences of choosing to believe that human existence doesn't actually mean anything. It's just the blind result of cause and effect over billions of years. This is why the question of who you are is the most important question in the world. Over the centuries, we tried to reduce ourselves to numbers and measurements, but now it's killing our mental health. It's robbing us of something essential. It's robbing us of what it actually means to live an authentic human life. We feel like we're trapped, that the course of our lives has already been written in advance, and we're powerless to make any meaningful choices about who we are and how we choose to live. And as a result of that, a lot of people are just giving up. But the Bible says that, first of all, your suffering is real. God has seen it, and He's promised to solve it. In fact, Psalm 56 suggests that God has been keeping track of every single tear you have ever shed. And then secondly, it tells me that you are also very real. Your life is not meaningless. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, Jesus taught? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. The moment we try to decouple our gift for rational thought from the God who gave us that gift in the first place is the moment when everything started to go off the rails. And today, I fear we're reaping a very bitter harvest. I know, again, some of you think this is just a book of fairy tales, some mythology written by ignorant and superstitious people who just didn't know any better and didn't have science. But maybe it's time to give this book another look. Because what if you found exactly what you're looking for? What if you found exactly what was missing in these pages? What if this really is a communication from the one who made you? I'm Sean Boonstra. Thanks for joining me. This has been another episode of Authentic.
You've been listening to Authentic, sponsored by Voice of Prophecy. Remember, you can listen every week right here at the same time. And thank you. Authentic is funded by listeners just like you. You can support at voiceofprophecy.com. That's also where you can find all the episodes you missed, or where you can listen again. That's voiceofprophecy.com.